So the plan for the evening is I'm going to talk a little bit and give some tips about, breaking into the legacy publications as they're now known, which makes me feel really old. And then we will be joined by Evan Armstrong, who is actually a current student on a semester's leave who has been pursuing alternative forms of freelancing in order to retain more of the profits from his work. So he's been using some different models that I think are really interesting and has had a lot of success with that. And then we'll be joined last by Nur Ibrahim, who is an alum of our program and used to work for Al Jazeera, and also has worked in TV most recently, but has always kind of had some, the day job, but freelance gigs on the side, including contributing to multiple book anthologies. So she's going to talk a little bit about that and the post-Hopkins life as a writer. So I will get started first, and I'm going to share my screen and just run through some tips that I have, again, on freelancing. So just to start off, one of the first things for nonfiction writers is to come up with ideas, try to get a sense of what makes a good feature or profile. So I have some tips there. One thing to look for is a surprising angle. And in this instance, I was going to share an article, if this would link to this, a piece called Mold Eats the World in topic.com. And I thought this was a really interesting piece because it was on the heels of hurricanes and all of the mold and stuff that people were struggling with in these areas. But it was a really interesting take on the whole issue, and it really took the discussion in a different direction. It begins by a profile of a woman who had studied mold all her life, beginning with mushrooms and looking at segues into the whole business of mold eradication in people's homes, and is that necessary, is that bad mold, etc. And this struck me as a story that was like already written, or mostly written, that the writer had done a lot of the research, because very quickly, I think this was on the heels of Katrina, this piece appeared. And so it was a really, again, timely piece, but that took a very different approach to a topic that was all over the news. So again, I have here my second bulleted point is you're looking for something that's timely to tie your piece into current events in some way, although that can certainly be a very oblique fashion. Stories that are somewhat complicated, beyond the, those who are for and those who are against, but that have some nuances to them, tend to be more interesting and lend themselves more to a feature or a profile. Access to your subject is essential, of course. Sometimes you want to make sure that you have that access in advance of pitching the story, certainly if it's a celebrity or something like that. But sometimes you need the imprimatur of the publication to approach the subject. So to be able to say, I'm working on a story for the Cincinnati Weekly News or whatever, so that people will give you access. Lively characters, people who are interesting and articulate, really make the writing a lot easier. We've all probably interviewed people who answer monosyllabically and then just sit there, and that's not going to be a good person to profile, obviously. Multimedia opportunities, so you want to look for options to maybe have an accompanying short video that doesn't echo precisely the piece, but that complements it in some way. One example of that would be a piece that I wrote for the Washington Post about a program here in Baltimore that dealt with kind of conflict resolution and arbitration. And I focused on a particular person for the whole article. And yet they did all kinds of conflict resolution. So the Post had a video team come in and shoot one of their sessions with high school students who'd had a big fight at their high school and stuff like that. So, be thinking about multimedia opportunities that you can do yourself, or that you can hook the publication up with, and that they can have their people do that. National stories with a local angle. So one example of that is, say Congress passed a law to eliminate the money bail bond system. What are the implications for this in Maryland or in Baltimore? Or a really good example from more recently is the science program just did a Zoom residency, but looking at health disparities. And they created a magazine, sciencewriter.org, in which they took what was a national problem, but they all, from all over the country, looked at how this issue of health disparities manifested itself in their state or in their city. So some wrote on midwifery, bringing that, and others wrote, I'm trying to see if they say the places. They're not saying a lot about where they are in the country, but these stories are from all over the country. So looking at food insecurity or environmental health or maternal and child health. Again, one topic that's that's part of the whole national conversation, and very much front and center, of course, because of COVID and disparities in access to care and vaccine rates, but taking that in all kinds of different directions. One suggestion I have in terms of thinking about stories is to trust your instincts. And I think you'll find that there's a million stories in your own backyard. Find them. It basically means chatting with everyone, from the grocery store clerk to the kids sitting on the corner, to the woman who raises ducks, etc. And you'll likely find some really interesting subcultures, and those can be a very good feature story. For example, whether it's like, competitive knitting, high school debate, collecting dead birds for science, whatever. And I did find for a couple of years, maybe 2 years, all of my stories, all of the subjects of my stories live within a 5-block radius of my house. So they're there. You just have to look. And when it comes to a pitch letter, I've gotten a lot of questions about what that query letter should look like. My suggestion would be to pre-report the story quite a bit, because one, the editors want to be convinced that there actually is a story. This is a photograph of a guy I interviewed who had been wrongly imprisoned in New Orleans for 27 years. Prior to pitching his story, I talked to him, I think it ran in the Nation. I talked to him quite a bit, and found not only, out about his story, but how that was playing out in contemporary New Orleans in terms of the quality of public defenders in that city. So, it pays to do some of that reporting up front, and then, spend some time writing a clean, clear, engaging pitch letter. And particularly if you are doing something that is like a music review or film review, things or a commentary, pitching some kind of commentary, pay particular attention to your voice, because what the editors are looking for in that letter is your voice and style. How will you write this piece? I don't think it's worth calling anybody. I would say email, always email, and do not attach your query letter, but include it as the body of the email, because you just want to cut down on that extra click for somebody, because if you have it in a attached document, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I'm reading this on the train, I'm going to look at it later, and then they never do. So just put it right in the email. And don't be afraid to follow up, a week or two later. And then once again, try again, just checking in. I've reattached my pitch. I hope you've had a chance to read it. I'd love to work for you, whatever. And when it comes to personal essays, and I'm talking here about the sort of popular press, not literary journals. Obviously, in literary journals, when you are submitting something, it's always a completed essay or short story or whatever. You can try pitching personal essays, but because they are so reliant on the writer's voice, I think it's really hard to successfully pitch them. I've never had any luck. I've written lots of and have published many personal essays, but I've never been able to get them past at the pitch stage. I usually, that's not true. I guess I have once, but for the most part, they want to see the full piece. And when I think about pitching, as I note here in the slide, I think about David Sedaris, right? So does he really write a pitch to the New Yorker editor saying, I'd really like to write an essay about this time I had a boil on my behind and my partner had to lance the boil, or I want to write one on quitting smoking, or the other day I coughed a lifesaver onto this passenger on a flight. Can I write an essay about it? I mean, you can see why that would not work as a pitch and why you're better off writing the piece and just sending that. So I wanted to share with you a sample of a local angle for a story, and I wrote this up this afternoon, even though it would actually probably be better if it was when she was still the first lady, but whatever. So this is what a pitch letter might look like, and let me see if I can reduce this so that you guys can see this. So this is one for Baltimore City paper. I'd like to propose a 2,000 word profile for Baltimore City paper along the lines of the terrific Carla Hayden profile, New Baltimore head of the Library of Congress, that ran in your August 12th issue. So you're showing the editor that you actually read the paper, and you're also saying this is going to be like that one. And then next paragraph, in 2 weeks, Michelle Obama's coming to the Morgan State campus in Baltimore. She's a snappy dresser. I have an opportunity to interview the woman who is the Obama's personal shopper. And she's the one who kind of got Michelle Obama on this jag about American designers, et cetera. So that third paragraph then is saying, this also gives the story a nice local angle and a good tie-in for Columbus Day coverage. The magazine's planning. I could report the story next week and have it to you by September 14th. And then the last paragraph is just a short paragraph saying, I've been working as a journalist for this long. My work's been in these publications. Here's a link to my website with some writing samples. So not too detailed. Here's another one that I wrote up this afternoon, but even though it is about the Korean spa in Windsor Mills outside of Baltimore, that is closed, sadly. So, you know, subject line, same thing, you know, story, pitch, soul spa for your winter's getaways issue. Noting in the first paragraph, 1,000-word piece for this particular issue. And then here, Jackie Jones, 46, and her daughter Lucinda lie on a floor mat in a bed of salt, peacefully steaming themselves. Lucinda reads Harry Potter, the book propped on her stomach. Jackie, a restorative eye mask on her face, listens to the silence and slowly lets the stress of her job seep from her body. Neither speaks. Neither is aware of the bitter wind howling as the snow whips into a storm outside. They're 2 hours into their Sunday at the Soul Spa, nestled in the salt cave. The snow piling up on Baltimore Security Boulevard feels worlds away. Then I'm giving two sentences about the spa, founded in 2001, 12 saunas, jacuzzis, blah, 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 costs $25. And then this next paragraph, as airfare rates skyrocket, more Americans this year are turning to staycations this winter, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, and fueling the rising popularity of spas. The Soul Spa is part of that trend. I've secured permission to interview some of the employees and customers and to have a photographer or videographer in there. I could have the piece to you by October 1st. I'm a freelance journalist. My work has appeared in these publications. So you will notice this one starts here with, after the first, you know, just what the topic of the piece is and the length. It's a little bit of an anecdotal lead there, just to draw you into the space. And then this paragraph that starts, as airfare rates skyrocket, more Americans are turning to staycations. That's a nut graph. So here's why I'm telling you this story. Here's why it's important. Here's why it's timely. And then just wrapping it up by saying why you're the person to tell that story. So, you know, here's again, sort of that structure: anecdotal lead, nut graph, why you're the one to write the story, link to your clips. One suggestion I have, and students who are in the thesis class already are well aware of this, but I'll climb on my soapbox here for others. It's really helpful if you have a website, because you have your work in one spot, that the work that you want to showcase. And it's a way of really controlling the editor's experience so that they're not reading the shitty piece you wrote when you were 23 and half the writer you are today, but you're posting, you know, only your best work, and so they're seeing you putting your best foot forward on this website. Another suggestion I have is to make sure that you know the publication and the editors. So make sure, first thing, really, really, really important, is to make sure that you that this magazine or newspaper or blog or whatever it is not previously written on this topic you're pitching, unless it was, you know, like 3 years ago or something, at which point you might say this will differ from the piece you ran in 2018 because blah, blah, blah. Because nothing annoys an editor more than having somebody pitch a topic when they just published a piece on it. And then research the publication skeleton. So look, you know, previously I would have said the contents page, but now, you know, it's the menu bar. So look at that and familiarize yourself with the sections so that you can figure out where your article idea or essay idea best fits. So you want to pitch that particular editor. And that will also help you with your pitch letter, because you'll know what the average length is for the stories that they run in that section. So you'll know if you're going to pitch a review of a band that their reviews run 450 words. So that will also show the editor that you know their publication well. Then look at the masthead. So that's always on the about drop down. Sometimes you have to search a little bit, but look at the editor's bios, see if you have any connections. Did any go to Johns Hopkins to get their master's in the writing program, etc. And also to see who edits which section, if they have that information, because it's always better to, if you want to write a piece for the City Observed section, to reach out and email that editor specifically rather than to the managing editor or to the executive editor. And I'm just going to link to one of those about pages. This is for the Intercept. So you can see here all of the bios. Well, you could until I got this little pop-up. Sorry. Brief bio and their emails. So this would really help you if you were trying to pitch a story to the Intercept, to get in here and, you know, find out a little bit about each of these people and find out who the person is that you want to pitch, etc. So, and again, that helps you with the article lengths and which sections. And then if that publication does not want your piece, then tweak it slightly and try a different publication. So, for example, the Michelle Obama piece on her personal shopper, I tried Local Angle with that. Maybe that would be something a local newspaper or magazine would be interested in, but I could tweak that pitch and send it to a fashion magazine or an online fashion publication to sort of try that angle. You know, or maybe you're doing some story about, I don't know, interior decorating and it doesn't work for this publication. Well, maybe tweak it some and it'll work for an architectural publication, those kinds of things. So, you know, keeping track of who you're pitching to, and then making sure as soon as you hear from one, if they're not interested, don't give up on that pitch because it's interesting to you or you wouldn't have bothered. Just, you know, reshape it, massage it, and send it off to the next person, to the next publication. So here. Also, one thing to keep in mind as you're doing this, particularly if you do not have very many published clips yet, is to think about it as almost like scaffolding as you build your portfolio. So start small. You can start with a blog, and then start with a small publication. Again, print or online, it doesn't matter. And one of the things that I have noticed is that the alternative press uses a lot of freelancers. They're always strapped for cash. And I say this with great fondness, but so they rely very heavily on freelancers, and they're great publications to get your foot in the door. And they can be, I have found in my own experience, the editors there tend to be quite good and will spend time with you working on a piece. And it's a really great way to build your clip file with clips that you're really proud of, that you can do your best writing for. Another suggestion for getting your foot in the door at places is to start with the short pieces. So in print, those used to be called front of the book pieces, and they're those short little, 200 word jobbers, or 200 to 400 words. Those are a great way to break into a publication because the stakes are lower for editors. They aren't taking on a freelancer they've never worked with for a 5,000 word piece. They're taking a shot with somebody at 300 words. And then you do a couple of those, do 2, do 3, keep pitching. As soon as you get the one published, pitch another one. And they will learn that you meet your deadlines, you get your facts right, that you know how to write to a word count. And then you pitch the bigger piece, a feature or profile or something like that. And then one last thought or thing that I've been getting some questions about lately too is pay. So my first suggestion is keep your day job for now. And some of our other speakers are going to talk about that a little bit. Noura's going to talk about that later in this conversation. But most places pay by the word. Sometimes it's sort of by the section, but it's usually by the word. But in terms of like my own writing career, I often divided things into 2 separate categories. There were those things I did for money. And that was, I wrote a lot for women's magazines on various health issues. And then there were those things I did because they were meaningful work where I could do the kind of work and reporting that was important to me and that would help me build my clip file. So those were, to my mind, much better pieces, although they paid less. And so I kind of tried to keep those 2 tracks going until they occasionally merged in well-written pieces that paid well. But that took a while. So, that's one thing to think about, and if you have the luxury of having a full-time day job, then you have the luxury of writing for not very much money in the beginning and really doing pieces that are beautifully written with compelling characters and complicated and all of the stuff that you want to then feature on your author page as work samples, and that will get you in the door to the places that do pay. That is my presentation, and we will definitely have time for questions. Evan is going to talk to us a bit about his own trajectory, how he was able to retain a lot of his income from his writing by bypassing some of those publications that I was talking about. So welcome, Evan. Thanks for coming.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here. So we have how many people? And so everyone here is students in the program currently. Is that the audience? Okay.
Yes.
So would it be most helpful to, I can just talk. I'm happy to hear the sound of my own voice, but maybe I can start with just like a 5-minute overview of just like where I've been, and then maybe answer questions, or I think that's probably the best way to proceed. I don't have a presentation, I don't have any fancy slides, for better or for worse.
That's totally fine. What I thought might be interesting for some of those that are here tonight is to talk a little bit about your own sort of trying to navigate, particularly the issue of pay,
Sure.
because you've taken an alternative route that I think is really interesting and, will be useful for people to know about.
Okay, well, let me run you through some basic statistics that are scary. The average for in your first year of writing, the average writer makes $24,000. You would make more working at McDonald's. If you're thinking about publishing a novel, 98% of books sell less than 5,000 copies. Book advances have dramatically decreased. So on average, you might get $6,000 as a book advance, and you have like 3 years of work ahead of you. And so there's just not a lot of money in the old ways of doing things. It's just very, very, very hard. And one example, when I was first starting my writing career, that really freaked me out is I had a friend buy lines in major pieces in the Times, the Post, Rolling Stones, all sorts of stuff. Big time, he built his whole career on freelancing, and he gave up and became a software engineer when he was like in his 40s because he just couldn't find a way to make it work financially anymore. So I start off with a scary example because I think it's important that like we address the reality, and there's a lot of reasons why that happens. Part of it is people love to write, and so like if there's something you'll do for passion and for love, then that means the market can pay you less because you're compensated in passion and love for what you do. And that's why you'll see the people who do technical writing or like really esoteric but high value stuff like science writing will make a lot more than people who cover, celebrities or internet culture or whatever it may be. The other reason outside of just like lots of passionate people willing to take less pay is there's intermediaries. So let's say you pitch at a magazine or newspaper, you got to pay, the editor has to get paid, the publication, the distributors, the management, all those people take a little bit of slice of the value that you generate. And so as you get more senior, you're able to capture more of the value, but it's never really much. You might make a couple of grand, as you get later into your career. So that's the market context for what it means to be a freelance writer. For my own career, I want to like highlight how unusual it is. Like it's not like advice where I'm saying anyone can do this. I don't know if anyone can do this. It happened to me, and it's been incredibly great. But take from it what you will. So I had never written anything in my life until like a year and a half ago. I mean, it was just like emails, and I did math for a living. So I worked at technology companies and did math. And then I started working at a company called Substack, which I don't know. Does anyone know what that is? Anyone ever heard of Substack? A few hands. Okay. So Substack is a newsletter platform. So you as a writer can go in and create a newsletter, and they'll send out all the emails. So I was there. I was employee number 9. Back before COVID started and newsletters became popular. I called it early, so I'm proud of that. And while I was there, I wrote a post analyzing dating app design ethics. Because you think about like the emotional power that these apps have over people, it's pretty wild, and we just kind of like wantonly let them do whatever they want. So I wrote this post and it went viral, and I was like, oh wow, that was fun. And so then I wrote another post and it went viral, and I was like, oh, this is really fun. And I started doing it more and more and more. And now I have my own newsletter. It has 18,000 subscribers. About total is about 2,000 paying subscribers. It's called Napkin Math. I can put a link in the chat if you're interested. And I write about business and technology, stuff like here. I can put this link. So this is not on Substack. I'm off Substack because it's too expensive. But yeah, so that's what I do. is I just started writing online because I had something to say and I was annoyed that no one was saying it. And I just kept doing that. And I happen to be really interested in something that people are willing to pay for. So most of my subscribers are like they work at corporations. So I have the CEOs of a lot of the major public tech companies or their finance teams. They all read what I write, which is very weird for a guy who didn't really have a Twitter until like a year ago. It's a very bizarre experience to be read, and it's incredibly fortunate. And because I have this audience, all my freelance work, I get offers to come. People come to me asking me to write for their publications because I have this built-in audience, and I just got offered like a monthly column in a magazine. I've helped corporations write stuff. It's been all sorts of things, which is really frustrating, I think, for a lot of people because I've only done this for a year and I have no reason to have the success that I've had. It's just been sheer dumb luck. And yeah, so that's the news. Oh, I skipped past the most important part. Why newsletters allow you to capture more of your pay. So there's two issues with your finances as a freelance writer. The hardest part is that your income is chunky, right? You'll write an article and you might get paid like $1,000 or $2,000 for it. And then you just kind of like hope and pray that the money lasts until you find your next article, or you can maybe, if you're lucky, stack up multiple articles. But it's very hard to have like predictable income. So my publication newsletters allow you to set up a subscription writing service. So I have guaranteed money coming into the bank. My newsletter is $240 a year. And I know that I have a certain amount of money that comes and I can predict what will happen with that money. And it allows me to make much smarter financial choices. It also allows me to capture significantly more of the value that I create. If I were just to go write for like TechCrunch or Harvard Business Review, like I would still be paid on a freelance rate, but there's no middleman. It's just me in the inboxes of my readers every week. And there's no middleman in the finances either. So I don't pay money to anybody. It's all mine. The subscriptions money is all mine. How do I attract readers? That's the hard part. That's demand gen. Technology businesses are built off of power laws, in that 1% of the writers or 1% of the participants in the system will capture 90% of the value. So that's why Google and Facebook are so big, and all these tech companies get so big so fast. It's the exact same thing in newsletter writing. A very small percentage of people capture the majority of the value. And this is true for all creative platforms, whether it's OnlyFans or Etsy or Twitch or any creator platform. 1% or less of people capture all the value. So doing demand gen, you essentially have like generating demand and interest in your newsletter. You have a few choices. One is to be incredibly niche. I have friends who write about very small, weird things. I have a guy who writes about mushrooms, and they're pulling in $1 million a year, just them in their bedroom. So that's option one, is to be incredibly niche. Option two is to leverage a pre-existing network. So what I did to seed my newsletter a year ago was I just cold emailed 50 famous people. And this was before news. And you have to remember, it was a different time. A year and a half, newsletters weren't a thing. So it was like novel and everyone was bored at home with COVID. And so I said, hey, I'd like to invite you to my beta. And then I lied and said that there was all these CEOs on it and you'd be missing out. So key to demand gen is lies. But that's what I said. I was like, oh, this isn't going to miss out. I'd like to invite you to the beta. And so getting people with large audiences as my readers to start helped seed my growth really quickly. And then the third option is to just be really freaking smart and write content that's so good, people will find it anyways. It's hard to do that every week, but that's what a lot of people will do. So that, yeah, I can answer any questions or talk more about what I write, or what can I do to be helpful?
What was the issue with Substack? What's the, I don't use Substack. I'm familiar with it, but
Sure.
what was the issue?
So, in my opinion, I have to be careful because I have lots of NDAs and signed legal documents about what I can say publicly about the company. But it charges 10% of your revenue. So in the early days, when you might be making a grand or two, like not a big deal. But as you scale up the size of your business, it becomes a fairly significant fee for what, in my opinion, should just be charged as software, because they don't really funnel any demand towards you. You just kind of it's a tool that pretends to be a marketplace, if that makes sense. But it's a great tool. So I am currently, as part I skipped, so I'm currently part of a writers collective called Every, and if you, that's on the at every.to. We're a group of business writers and technologists. So we've created our own platform. So we've coded everything from scratch and done it ourselves. So that's what we're on. I can talk more about the Writers Collective if people are interested in that. How much do I rely on social media? Not at all. I'm really bad at it. I'm really bad at it, and I'm fortunate. It's kind of a self-fulfilling machine at this point. Is whenever I write something, people will tweet about what I write and they'll share it with their friends, and it helps the flywheel go faster. And I also, as part of this collective, I have a social media manager who does stuff for me, but I don't really use social, but a lot of writers do. Like, so I have a couple, I have a friend, he is like, all of his growth comes from people on Twitter, and, he's pulling in 900, last I heard, probably more by now. And it all comes from Twitter. How far in advance do you tend to propose to have a story ready upon? Oh, I think Lisa's question, I cannot answer. I have no idea. I can say that all of the freelance work I've done is because because editors have found my work online, and then they'll email me asking if I'm interested in writing for their publication. Karen, maybe you can answer that Lisa's question.
Yeah, it is really important to know, like, if it's gonna, especially if it's gonna have a print component, what the lead time is. So like for monthly publications, they're usually working, like closing an issue like at least 2 or 3 months in advance. And then weeklies, most of the weeklies, say they come out on a Wednesday, they're closing an issue on a Monday. But they would, for feature stories and profiles and stuff like that, they would probably want stuff about 2 weeks in advance. But you should pitch as far ahead as possible, because that just increases your chances of getting their attention before whatever time-tied event is coming down the pike. And obviously various online publications that are posting daily, that's less of an issue. Looks like, Evan, you've got another one about the newsletter.
How much time do I spend a week on the newsletter? I do have a day job. I work in a software startup in Salt Lake City, doing marketing for them. It's honestly, it's a grind. I'm really tired. I'm so tired. Which is why I'm not taking any classes this semester. Sorry, Karen. But so I have a day job. I write at night and on the weekends. And then part of the reason I'm also busy is I'm getting married in like 30 days. And that's more work than my other 2 jobs put together. If anyone's gone through a wedding, I recommend eloping. So it is a lot of work, but it's so fulfilling. Like, the reason, like, writing is so magical, like it's just the best job in the world. If you can find a way to make it work, it really is the best job. And it's been incredibly fulfilling. I really like it. And the other thing that's been really interesting is like the serendipity that comes from publishing online. And that, like, I've had easily 20 job offers come through over the last 6 months of publishing online, of just like people offering to hire me for stuff. And just because they read my writing. And so if you're writing about something, especially if you're writing about more professional topics, like you'll be surprised at the people who read it and the people who like offer you things. It's been that's been one of the things I didn't expect at all. I could go full time on it now, but I did just sign a very expensive lease, and so I'd like to wait a little bit. The other thing that's been interesting is I always thought I would just be a writer, but now a lot of my readers are asking for me to teach a class. So I may teach a class and I can do it all through online and I don't have to pay anybody. So I can, because I teach professional things, I can charge, 500 or $1,000 for the class and I capture all that. So, Karen, if you ever wanted to break away from Johns Hopkins and teach your own class, you could probably do well. Internet's great. So
my business knowledge would probably not be up to scratch, but I have another question from Courtney about the Writers Collective and how we can emulate that.
Sure.
It just sounds magical to have your own like social media team and your own software development team. How can we do what you're doing?
It honestly is magical. So I have 2 editors, a social media manager, and some software developers who can do custom things with our system, which is great. So how I joined the collective is I was writing online, and then the founders of the collective were readers of mine. And so they emailed me saying, hey, we're forming this thing about where we're going to get a bunch of writers together and offer editorial and marketing and technical support, but you still have a revenue share model. So I split my revenue 50-50 with them. And so, but in return, so I get $10 a month from each reader, they get $10 a month. But in return, I get an editor who's freaking amazing. She's been an editor for 20 years. And I get marketing, so they do social media. And then it's also been a really unique brand halo. So, I've been offered syndication in, places with millions of readers. So it's been incredible. It's really made my career. As far as how to get in, I was an unusual case because I was the first outside writer they recruited and they just liked my stuff. I was just publishing online. I only had maybe a few hundred readers back then. So it wasn't like, it was just pure serendipitous luck. But now for the collective, we just finished our fall batch, but we do accept pitches for new writers. Every season or 2, we allow some new people to come in. So this time we have like Adam Davidson, who was the guy who made the Planet Money podcast and has written a few books. There's all sorts of really interesting people who applied. I don't know where we stand in the process. I don't deal with that stuff too much. The other thing they do for me too is they have an ad sales team. So I have people who sell advertisements in the newsletter. And so I get subscription money from the paying subscribers. For all the free guys, I sell ads. If you're looking to sell an ad, it's currently $2,000 a pop. So that's great too. So it's been really amazing. As far as like other writers collectives, there's not any that I'm truly aware of that are doing this. Like we're something very new. There isn't really anything else like us out there. There are some, I don't know if we talk about crypto, if that might be too far in the technical weeds, but there's some cryptocurrency backed media companies that do something similar, but we're the only collective that I know of.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. As a collective, do I
have a question? I have a question just about audience. So you're saying your readers spend like nearly $300 a month to subscribe, and that you reached out to like famous celebrities, and then you have like people, corporations, but like that would never be my audience. So like, how would I convince someone to subscribe to my drivel? Do you know, like who would pay money? That blows my mind. I just feel like I don't know how many of us have the subject matter to warrant paying that. I mean, heck, I don't even subscribe to literary magazines I should be reading all the time because I'm too poor. So I guess that's the question, is like, I believe you and I understand how it works, but I just don't know how that would transfer to those of us who don't write on like such like profitable subject matter.
Yeah, and it is, to be clear, you know, 240 for the year, not the month, thankfully. But I actually do have a friend who writes about Bitcoin. He charges 500 a month, so it does happen. As for people who cover, like, you can think of newsletters as a job to be done. So like your readers are, when they're paying you, they're hiring you to fulfill a job. So my job is to help people make really smart investment choices. And if they, you know, so that's a job people are willing to pay lots of money for. If anything, I'm underpriced. I probably should raise my prices, because if, you know, people use my writing to justify multi-million-dollar deals, so I should capture more, in my opinion. But for the other jobs, if you're not helping them to make a decision, is, you know, entertainment is a job to be done. And there are many newsletters who do quite well writing about pop culture or media. There are writers about, if you browse Substack, you can find writers on just about every topic under the sun. The biggest advice I would give is you shouldn't think of your stuff as drivel. That's mistake number one. This is the most common mental block I see for writers, is I think, I used to, when I worked at Substack, I would talk to writers like, what if I just charge them 50 cents for a year? I feel like that's too much. And so there's a price floor at Substack, is a $5 minimum per month. They have to pay at least $5. And I think people greatly underestimate the number of people there are on the planet that are interested. There are over 3 billion people on the internet. The entire planet is on the internet. And no matter what you write about, guaranteed, there are enough people interested in that topic that they'd be willing to pay for it. Your task is to write things that draws them in and then define them. So, you know, I don't know what you write about, but your job, I can guarantee you there's at least a few hundred people online who'd be willing to pay to read really good stuff about it.
Well, thank you very much, Evan. I appreciate it. And everybody check out his Napkin Math. It's a good read. Just to give you guys kind of an example of the kind of things he writes about. The piece I read most recently was one on carbon, recapturing carbon from truckers and then reselling it. And it was about this startup company that was involved in doing that kind of work. And I would say Evan's greatest asset is his ability to write plainly and clearly about really complicated things, so that people like me who know nothing about business can easily follow what he's writing about. So
it helps to be a very plain person to write plainly, and so that's the key to success. I do have to brag. I just had a big one. I wrote a theory about 2 weeks ago about how like Facebook would be forced to capitulate to its major users for content moderation. I don't know if you guys saw, but the Wall Street Journal just published an expose that Facebook had allowed all of its Republican and hardcore right extreme users to have no content moderation at all. So anyways, I had a very public validation of my theory, which I was very excited about. So well, thank you, everyone. I'll put my email in the chat.
I have a quick question, actually. What are you, if you're already where you are, what are you getting out of this program?
Oh, I still think I'm a terrible writer. I would love to learn how to write someday if I have the time. I can't take classes right now. I just can't. I don't have the time between a job, a wife, and a very busy newsletter. But I think once I go full time on the writing next year, I'd like to start taking classes again, because there are a lot of people who can come up with good ideas. There are a lot of people who can write beautiful prose, but the people who can do both are very, very few. And I'd like to improve my prose and my writing pretty significantly. So yeah, my email is just there in the chat. So if you guys have any questions, if I can help with anything, feel free to reach out.
Great. Thank you very much, Evan.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Karen, and hi, everyone. The the program, as I mentioned, I graduated from it in 2017, back when I lived in DC. I presently live in Brooklyn, New York, where I'm a reporter and a fact checker for Snopes, which is a fact-checking misinformation site. So just sort of a quick summary of what I've been doing since graduating. Well, while I was in the program, I was a television producer, and I've been working in journalism throughout the program and since then. And I've been working in TV production for various shows after, like I worked for a few comedy shows, which were news comedy hybrid shows, which was the first one was The Opposition with Jordan Klepper on Comedy Central. And then I followed that up with a job as a news producer with Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj on Netflix. And then during the pandemic, I'm from Pakistan, so I basically was throughout 2020, I was stuck in Pakistan for travel and pandemic and visa reasons. And so I worked from there for Snopes over the past year, and now I'm back. And so that's sort of a rough summary of my day job, the day jobs I've held since graduating. But the other stuff that I've been doing, which is mainly writing in fiction and nonfiction, I was a part of the fiction program because I felt like that was my first love. That was the work that I wanted to spend time doing while I was doing nonfiction in my work life. But since then, it's been a mix of writing a lot of essays, journalistic pieces, and some short stories as well. And actually, Karen's class was her introduction to nonfiction writing class was actually the place where I wrote my first proper essay that ended up being published in an anthology a few years later. It was a very personal essay, and Karen and the whole class back then really helped me hone it and make it like the way I wanted it to be. And then it ended up being in an anthology about immigration and immigrants with Catapult, which is called A Map is Only One Story. And that's it was really the first nonfiction piece. So I really have to thank Karen and everyone who in the class, that's the one, yeah, who for helping me work on that piece. It was a very special one and really the first thing I ever wrote as a nonfiction essay. So I think that what the program helped me do was really give me a structure and help me build confidence to write and help me create a bunch of things that I ended up submitting and working on submitting after I graduated. And some of them are still some of them actually found homes, and some of them I'm still working on them. So, but since then I've come in like a handful of anthologies that were nonfiction. I just came in an anthology about horses and growing up riding horses as a girl in this book called Horse Girls, which was edited by the editor of Electric Literature, Halima Marcus. You should really look her up because she's someone who publishes a lot of new and young writers. And then I've published a lot of fiction in various anthologies and collections and mostly short stories. These days, though, and this is something that I actually spoke to Karen about, and some of my fiction professors, Elise and others, Elise Levine and Ellie Williams, were very helpful in recommending me for. I'm working on a fellowship with the Lighthouse Writers Book Project, and I'm working on a book for the next 2 years through that fellowship where I'll also be teaching. So if anyone wants to take classes, I'll probably start teaching classes through the Lighthouse Writers Workshop later this fall. And so that's sort of the summary of what I've been doing. And really the program was my foundation for a lot of the work that I'm still sort of working and putting out these days. And it really helped me gain confidence in my ability to write as both nonfiction and fiction, but also because I felt like I was meeting people who were living very, busy and real lives and who were not stuck in the MFA world. They were really out in the world doing their own thing. And that was a huge help because I met professionals, I met people who were working parents. And that was one of my favorite things about the program, is that it was just such an interesting group of people from a range of backgrounds and a range of experiences. And really, I got the most out of it because the people around me were so helpful and inspirational and gave me the best feedback. And, I hope I gave them the same. So, so that's sort of where I'm at. And I generally would love to spend more of this time talking to you guys and answering questions and addressing any sort of I guess, suggestions for what you're doing as you're approaching the end of your time in the program.
I have a question about the anthologies. How do people find you or you find them? Is it your network? How does that work?
So it really varies, but I remember in one of my classes, it was actually my thesis class with Ed, and he gave us a long list of books and collections and and publish and literary magazines to reach out to. And he gave us this really good piece of advice early on, which was have your A list, which is your best, your highest aspirational list, and then sort of go down from there. And at the time, and I wish I took his advice and other teachers' advice during the program, which is to really aim high. I really made my B list my A list and relied on that. And that's when I started submitting. And the first place that I ever submitted to was literally, which is a great magazine, but it was straight at the end of my thesis portion, was one of the short stories from my thesis with this magazine from Skidmore College called Salma Gundi. And they were just on the list that Ed gave us. And I just sort of threw in a letter. It was over mail. And then like a few months later, I got a response that it got in. So I was like, oh my God, this means I should have tried. I should keep trying and keep doing it and aiming for the A list. And so the A list is obviously the usual like Paris Review and New Yorker and like the really like, up there places. But the rest of the magazines actually happened to be also, again, I made a connection through the writing conference that Johns Hopkins has in DC. I made a connection with another writer who's also taught through the program, Rian Amalkar Scott. And he connected me to someone who was an editor with Catapult, which is the group that published A Map is Only One Story. So a lot of my early connections were through Johns Hopkins, and they introduced me to publications like Catapult, like Salma Gundi, and Catapult was the place that published my first print anthology. And then the rest of it sort of happens from there. People will follow you. I'm on Twitter, so when I publish something, I tweet about it, and then I'd get like a bunch of writers who'd follow me, and then I'd follow them, and then they would tweet stuff that I'd see, like, "Hey, we're accepting submissions for an anthology on XYZ," and then I'd immediately be like, "Is this something I'm interested in?" Like the one about horse girls was only because I heard of electric literature because everyone else was sharing articles from electric literature, and I admire the editor. And so that was very much a cold email. I saw that there was a pitch about girlhood and horses and how, you defy stereotypes through horse riding, and how it can be a story beyond like wealth and privilege, and how it's really about identity and finding yourself as a girl. And so they were looking for pitches around that theme. And so I decided that, oh, this is something that I have a lot of feelings about, because I grew up riding horses, but not in a setting that one would imagine. And so I just sort of really quickly, it sort of struck me, and then I quickly wrote a few paragraphs of a pitch, and I emailed it to Halima, whose email was on the promotion for it. And that was the second time that I got like into what I consider a really exciting and cool anthology with a lot of writers I really love, like Carmen Maria Machado was in that anthology, and Maggie Shipstead, who just got nominated for a Booker, shortlisted for a Booker, and like a lot of amazing writers. So I was like, this is like a dream come true. And so it literally just happened by cold emailing and putting in a pitch. And then I worked on that pitch for 6 months. And even then she came back to me and said, oh, there are tons of edits. I need to see you make these edits before I can confirm it. And so I just like really like went haywire, just working on the edits that she suggested. And so it really was a matter of just working hard, a portion of it through the pandemic, to get that essay just right. And so I've only worked on maybe 3 or 4 big essays over the course of the last few years alongside short stories, which in addition to my day job, because A, there's no time, and B, sometimes these essays take months and months to write, and I'm a very slow writer. But as to your question, like, some of it was just fortuitous, me seeing things on Twitter and following a lot of people I admire. And some of it was through people who Johns Hopkins introduced me to, who were really supportive, and you just sort of email them and be like, hey, I have this piece. I'd love to, Rion was the person who I gave my first flash fiction piece to. He sent it to Mensa Demari, who's an editor at Catapult. And Mensa put it up in his in one of his literary magazines that isn't functional anymore, but that's how he accepted my piece for the anthology, because he knew my work already through a flash fiction piece I did. So it's really like just holding on to connections, and also people who are just kind enough to, you know, to give me a shot. And so those were just sort of a handful of things that happened through building different networks through the Hopkins community. And so I really think that, you know, everyone in the teaching team at Hopkins and the administrative team have been so helpful. Every time I email them, they're always ready to give me a recommendation for a fellowship or something or the other. And so really take advantage of the community that's already around you, especially your professors. They were invaluable to me, for sure.
Thank you. That's really, that makes a lot of sense. And like basically like you're building relationships with people. And also my experience is people want to help the person down the ladder from them, right? Because that's how they got forward. And granted, everybody's really busy, but what's the worst that can happen? They say no, or they ignore your email.
Exactly. I never thought that, you know, I always hesitated to ask anyone if they're looking for something or sending a pitch out. And then I realized that the first few times that I actually got accepted, I was like, what was I sitting around waiting all those years for? You know, there's actually, if you have a shot, you can take it. And yeah, the worst that can happen is a no, because I was too afraid of the no's to actually just try. So it's really, and you know, one other thing that helped me organize is like, the literary magazines that were suggested in our classes and as reading material and stuff, I did make like Twitter lists or add them to a list of things so that I just kept following them, so that I could keep track of when there's a submission or a competition and, you know, things like that. So there's ways you can organize the things you like, but really just keep in mind all the places you admire and think that that's where I want to be, that's where I want to submit to. I'm going to keep my eye on them for the next few years. Even if something today I didn't get in the next few years, something else will make it, or something else will fit their call for submissions or whatever. So it's really a question of seeing the right thing, but also seeing that you're a right fit for that submission or the theme or whatever it is.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And also you get used to the no's after a while.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I guess one thing I can talk about is balancing full-time job with writing things that I want to write at the same time on the side. I think that, you know, it's sort of, again, Hopkins sort of prepared me for that life, is because I had evening classes and a day job, which I think a lot of folks here have the same schedule. And that was really helpful for later on, because I realized that I have a bunch of writing and a bunch of sort of work that I've created over the 2 years I was at Hopkins, and now I need to build on that or keep going. So the one thing that was really useful was, which is what Mark actually told us to do early on in our intro fiction classes, was to sort of create a system where you keep writing. So even if it's 20 minutes to half an hour a day. And I never followed that system for like years. I just sort of was too busy, got caught up in things, only worked on things I enjoyed or felt inspired by. But then that advice came back to me during the pandemic, because I was just sort of stuck in the rut and I couldn't work. I was stressed out. I mean, as many of us have been during this time. And I joined this group called The Grind, and it basically forced me to write every single day and send an email to everyone during showing what I've written. And if you don't send that email, they kick you out of the group. So it's a matter of like sort of trusting each other. You get put in a group of 5 or 6 writers. You get put in prose or poetry or mixed media or whatever. And so I've been doing that for a couple of months, and it helped me write up a bunch of chapters that I submitted for the fellowship that I'm currently in. So it forced me to actually put together an application for a fellowship. And so things like that, and it's free, it's for anyone. You literally just have to commit to writing every single day and emailing a group an excerpt of what you've written and proving that you wrote something new. And if you don't do it, anyone on the group, if you forget, they can just kick you out and no one will care. So that sort of was one of the things that, you know, I remembered Mark's advice is like, it made me write half an hour every single day. It forced me, because I didn't want the shame of being the one person who got knocked out of the group. And I write, and it's mostly crap. Like you can send a sentence that's utter rubbish as long as you write that sentence. And so that's one of the things that helped me work on my own essays, fiction, nonfiction, while I'm doing my own day job and the regular stuff. And so there's various techniques and ways to do it. I took a few Catapult classes after graduating. I worked with friends who held each other accountable. And you really just have to find the time during the day, and everyone sort of has different commitments and schedules and struggles. So this was the one that helped me finally get into that. So if you can find something like that, or join the grind after you dealing with a full-time job and you don't have a graduate program to force you to, and grades to worry about and things, then I recommend working on things where you have a community who will hold you to account, because that was the most useful way for me to start working on my book.
So Noor, do you read the other people in your group's work and comment on it, or is it just look, I did it, and
no, it's actually we don't have to comment on anything. The point is just to sort of keep generating, and that's why it's low intensity in the sense that you're not expected to comment. You can read everyone's work, and you sort of have this expectation that there's an expectation that you all trust each other enough that you're never going to publicize anyone else's work. People are sharing some very intimate and meaningful stories, and really generating them over a period of time. The point of these groups is that you have to write, even if you're writing rubbish, even if you're writing something that's totally nonsense. The point is you have to write, and the only thing that the rest of the group has to do is to hold you accountable if you're not writing. If you forget a day or miss something or the other, anyone in the group can just sort of remove your email address from thread and just start emailing everyone the next day's thing. That's a good thing about it, is you're not expected to give feedback. You can, if you ever want to email a person separately, but that's not the point of it. And I think the point of, once someone has written something through the grind, I'll actually send you guys a link. Yeah, it's by Ross White. That's sort of the way to go ahead and do it. And I know that everyone sort of is located in different places, and I'm in New York, which most people are like, you have to go to New York and then you can be connected to the writing community. It was actually really, really beneficial to find through the pandemic that there's so many virtual writing communities, so many book clubs now, so many events that you can now attend that don't require you to be in the heart of all the literary worlds. And so attending those actually, even during the pandemic, were a huge help for me, because I made friends through book clubs, through the grind, through attending random little workshops here and there. So yeah, this is so I do recommend things like that for sure. Yeah, so this fellowship, I'll actually share the link for that. I only just started it a few weeks ago. So the jury is still out on how useful it is, because it's only just started. So again, I was looking for something to motivate me to work on a long book, because up until now, I've only ever worked on short stories and essays and journalism pieces. So the Lighthouse Writers Fellowship is basically, you commit for 2 years through a bunch of, through a mentorship, through, again, a group of 6 other people in a cohort under a mentor who work on, and you work on your book. You can opt to take classes. I'm a teaching fellow, which covers my tuition for the fellowship. So I will teach 3 classes this year and next semester. And through that process, you have even writing intensives. So they're usually in person, but this time they're on Zoom. So in end of September, I'll have an intensive with the 6 other people in my group who are also book project people. And ultimately now the application process was relatively straightforward in that I just need to give names of 2 recommendation people, recommenders, and I had to submit the first 20 or so pages of the book that I was working on and a pitch for the book. And again, none of these things are things I've ever done. There are people who came to Johns Hopkins, for example, with novels written or novels they were working on. I had only ever worked on short stories, but I did get a sense of how to prepare or work on novels because I was reviewing other people's novels in the program. So what I did was I wrote a summary of I guess the idea of my novel. Again, that could probably change. Submitted the first 20 pages that I actually worked on during the grind that forced me to write those 20 pages. And you submit that, and then you get, you request you list out the mentors that you want, because they have a list of 5 people who work in fiction, nonfiction, and then you get to choose and then they will select the mentor and pair the mentor up with the mentee. And so they select a group of 6 per mentor. And because there are 5 people, it's around, the entire 2-year program has then 24, 25 people in total, including me and the 6 people in my group and my mentor. So ultimately that's like requires you to have like a solid first chapter. Again, I didn't have much experience writing one, so I read a lot of first chapters. I read a lot of things that make a good first chapter, and read a lot of books that require me to, that had similar first chapters to what I was aspiring to. And I ended up submitting like a very short first chapter and then a second and third. And then I put in, I asked Elise and Ellie from Johns Hopkins, who taught me as well, to recommend me, to be my recommendation contacts. And so they were super helpful and they agreed to do that, which was really, really great of them. And yeah, those are the main things that were required. And sorry, there's someone else who's speaking. There was, and this is maybe the 5th or 6th fellowship that I've actually applied for over the last 2 years, because they're really difficult to get into. It's really a question of submitting the same piece that you're passionate about. But up until this year, I didn't have a novel that I was working on that I was passionate about. And I could tell that in my previous applications. I could tell that I didn't have the work that was ready to present to the fellowship. And this time I felt like I could confidently talk about what I wanted the novel to be, what was required in the application. And I think they could tell as well. That's my assumption as to why I got in. So there are tons of fellowships out there. But especially for people based in New York, I know that there's a lot more that are now remote because of the time we live in. But yeah, if you guys like, I can also give my email, and I'm always happy to send you names of fellowships I've applied for that I didn't succeed in. And there's so many out there, and they really support writers from a range of backgrounds and not just people sitting in New York City. And it's just a question of having that piece of work that you're really willing to discuss and talk about, and you feel passionately about, and it feels like something concrete that you can work on. Because they can tell, and then you can tell that, are you willing to commit years of work into this? Obviously, you don't need a fellowship to keep writing. I always needed this motivation, and I was like, why not apply? And now it's giving me motivation to keep going. The book might change, it may not continue the way it is, but at least someone is holding me to account. So I find that a fellowship is a good way to do it. But you can also just keep doing the grind and keep working on that, and that's free, and that's sort of very low, it has a very low kind of commitment level. You just sort of are held to account by a bunch of people. And yeah, there's a lot of people who've had different routes to how they keep working while they have other jobs, and mine is just one route.
Okay. What's your novel about? If you want to talk about it.
It's really hard to talk about it because when I do, I feel like it sounds really stupid. So I will refrain from talking about it, but I will say that it was a bunch of stories in a bunch of books that we actually read in our fiction writing classes at Hopkins that really helped me get inspiration for it. I remember we read a bunch of Margaret Atwood. That was a huge, huge inspiration, and the discussions we had in class were really, really cool and helpful. There was a lot of, so Mark Farrington had a really great section in our fiction classes that were about voice and third person, omniscient, second person and first person voice that I still think about now, and I'm probably going to try to use when I start teaching, that really helped me when I was starting to draft this novel. So going back to my notes from classes, and I know that my readings from Karen's class were also really helpful when I started working on my essay. So all those sort of holding on to those notes, even though they're a pain to carry when you move from place to place, like those are really, really helpful. And I would definitely hold on to all the syllabuses that your teachers and professors give you, because they've been so invaluable. Yeah, so advice for new journalists. It really depends on what kind of journalism you are interested in doing, where you want to go, which medium you want to go into. And since you guys are in nonfiction, and I presume then it's mostly print or writing for the internet or the web, I think that the biggest thing is to, as freelancers, or if you want to write for a variety of places, is to just start developing pitches for the stories that you are particularly passionate about and feel like you can be the authority on, that, you know, really stories that will stand out from the mess out there. I know that when I was stuck in Pakistan during the pandemic last year, and I was in between jobs, and I will say, I'll preface all this with, you know, my jobs have often been defined by my visa status, and whichever job is willing to give me a visa sponsorship, because I'm not an American citizen. So, you know, you sort of have to find, and the media industry is also shrinking very rapidly. It's getting harder to find a footing in all that. So with that in mind, like, it's really important to look for the things that you are passionate about, that you can speak authoritatively on, or at least sort of start learning about the things that you're really passionate about, and start building your niche in there. You know, you don't have to restrict yourself, but it is such a weird industry these days where everything's sort of dying, or people are sort of being laid off 24/7. And so you really have to sort of start building, yes, I'm teaching fiction. You really just have to start building your own niche. So when I was in Pakistan, I wrote a piece on the way the pandemic was affecting minorities, people from minority backgrounds and genders and religions in the country. And because there's a lot of different forms of, the government sort of oppresses people in different ways, and society does too. So that sort of was a story that I worked on in the early days of the pandemic, while I was in Lahore. And I wrote it for, again, a pretty niche publication. It's called The Juggernaut, which is for South Asians and South Asian issues in the diaspora and in the countries that South Asians come from, like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. And so that was the main piece that I ended up working on. And then even when I was with Snopes, which mainly focuses on fact checks for America and American stories, and you know, back then it was Trump and the elections and the Black Lives Matter protests, I pitched them an idea about a sexual harassment case that was pretty big in Pakistan and was really spreading. It was between two pop stars, and it was spreading like wildfire across the internet, like misinformation and things like that. And so I was like, I know that our niche is not international news at Snopes, but this is something that's big on Twitter here. And like, people are asking me now that they know I'm a Snopes reporter. They're like, can you break all this down? So that took a couple of weeks to put together. It was a pretty intense story. I'll actually share that link, because it was pretty fascinating to work on. And there was so much misinformation, and so little that was, here we go, I'll just say that. And there was so little that Pakistani media was verifying. Pakistani media is very messy and often doesn't speak the truth, and often is like influenced by different bad actors and the government. So it was a much more difficult thing to work out compared to, say, writing for issues that are going on in the US. So it was interesting, but I also took, that was my niche. I sort of was like, I'm in Pakistan, this is a big issue here, like, let's just experiment, and why don't we try this international topic? And they were like, sure, go for it. And so I did have to balance that with my daily fact checks, which are more popular, like COVID misinformation and all that. But I worked on that over a few weeks while writing a bunch of other stuff. So balancing the stuff that I was passionate about with day job stuff, which is a lot of like clickbaity articles, like quick, is this mask meme on Facebook real, you know, things like that. I had to work through that, but it was pretty exciting to figure that out. But it is very challenging to jump into journalism these days. I mean, most of my friends and people around me are very burnt out. I'm pretty burnt out. It's not easy for aspiring journalists, and it definitely feels harder than when I started out, which was in 2013 when I graduated college. Like, it was definitely pretty tough then, and it feels like it's harder now because everyone I know is very burnt out. But again, I'm always happy to talk about it and talk about some of the really dirtier aspects of the industry, which I've experienced a lot too, in the TV world. And I'm always happy if someone wants to email me and talk to me about it. Like, I'll add my email here, or just sort of ask advice about television, because most of my experience up until recently has been in television. So feel free to reach out and I will try to respond at my earliest.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you, Karen, for, being the reason why I've been able to write and helping me get started.
Oh, well, thank you for coming. That was really great. It was good to hear what you've been up to, and lots of good advice for people. So thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, feel free to email me, and nice to meet all of you.